The rain had already begun when Lily Monroe unlocked the front door of the Harbor Light Diner. Newport mornings were always gray in early November, but that day the sky looked bruised, heavy, and restless. The old bell above the door chimed softly as she stepped inside. The smell of salt from the ocean drifted in, with her mixing with the faint aroma of yesterday's coffee grounds. She hung her damp coat by the counter and switched on the radio out of habit. A crackle of static filled the silence before a calm male voice broke through. Billionaire real estate magnate Ethan Cole remains in critical condition at New York General Hospital, the announcer said. Sources confirm the CEO of Cole Industries has been on the transplant list for months. Doctors are now appealing to potential donors with type O blood. Lily paused mid-motion, holding a dish rag in one hand. The word transplant struck her like a bell echoing through an empty hall. She turned the volume up, her reflection flickering in the chrome coffee machine. Ethan Cole. She had heard that name before. It was the kind that appeared in business magazines and whispered conversations about power. None of that mattered. What mattered was the sound of the announcer's voice, the weight of desperation beneath every carefully read word. She stood still until the report ended, replaced by a low jazz tune. Outside, rain tapped against the diner windows, a quiet metronome counting her heartbeat. She poured herself a cup of coffee and stared out at the parking lot, nearly empty, except for a single car coated in sea mist. The world beyond the glass looked blurred, softened by rain. Somewhere far away, a man was dying, and she could almost feel it. 3 years ago, Lily had waited in a hospital like that. She had sat beside her mother's bed and watched machines breathe for her. The doctors had said there was still hope that a donor might appear. But no call ever came. After her mother's funeral, Lily had promised herself she would sign the donor registry. It was the only way she knew to keep her mother's kindness alive. The phone rang just as she finished her shift. She almost ignored it, assuming it was Rosa, her boss, checking the inventory. But the voice on the line was unfamiliar. Ms. Monroe. "This is Dr. Mason from Rhode Island General. Your profile shows you as an active living donor with type O negative. We have an urgent case in New York. A man's life depends on your decision." For a second, she could not speak. Rain beat harder on the windows, and the hum of the refrigerator filled the silence. "Do you need time to think?" the doctor asked gently. She looked at the small framed photo of her mother pinned behind the counter, the one with the words written in pen, "Be kind even when it hurts." Lily swallowed her throat tight. "No," she said quietly. "If it can save someone, that's enough." 2 days later, the world turned sterile white. Hospital lights replaced the gray dawns of Newport. Lily lay on an operating table, her heart steady beneath the monitors. She did not know the man's name, only that he was 35 and running out of time. As anesthesia began to pull her into sleep, she whispered a silent prayer that whoever he was, he would get another sunrise. At that same hour, in a tower of glass overlooking Manhattan, Ethan Cole lay pale and unconscious. His company's logo gleamed cold on the skyline. He had built empires, negotiated billion-dollar deals, and outlasted competitors. But none of that mattered now. Tubes and monitors surrounded him like a fortress of wires. On his left hand, a gold wedding band gleamed faintly. The nurse beside him adjusted his IV, her voice low as she said, "The donor is ready, sir. The surgery begins in 10 minutes. If anyone had been in the room to hear it, they might have noticed the faint movement of his lips, a whisper drowned by the hiss of oxygen. It sounded almost like a thank you. Somewhere miles away, under the same gray sky, Lily's heartbeat slowed beneath the anesthesia. Two people who had never met, who would never have crossed paths in any ordinary life, were now bound by something invisible and irrevocable. When the clock struck noon, the rain outside New York General turned into a downpour. The city carried on unaware that a single decision from a waitress in a small coastal town was rewriting the end of a billionaire's story. They had never met. One was serving coffee by the sea. The other was a man dying alone in a tower of glass. But fate has a way of crossing paths that were never meant to meet. When Lily opened her eyes, everything was white. The ceiling above her was unfamiliar glowing. Softly under fluorescent light, her throat felt dry, and the faint beep of a heart monitor pulsed somewhere near her head. For a long moment she couldn't remember where she was or why she was there. Then the memory returned like a slow tide, the phone call, the hospital, the signature on the consent form. She turned her head slightly, wincing as pain bloomed under her ribs. A nurse appeared beside her, gentle and smiling. "You're awake," she said softly. "Everything went perfectly. The surgery was a success." Lily blinked. "He's alive." The nurse nodded. "Yes, you saved him." Relief spread through her like warmth. She didn't ask for the man's name, and the nurse didn't offer it. It was better that way. In the recovery room next door, the same machines hummed around another bed, but there the air smelled faintly of antiseptic and money. Ethan Cole stirred for the first time in days, his body weak but still alive. He opened his eyes to the ceiling of New York General, unfamiliar yet mercifully bright. A voice echoed near him. "Mr. Cole, can you hear me?" He blinked again, nodding faintly. A nurse smiled down at him. "The transplant was successful. You're stable now." He tried to speak, but his throat was raw. "Who?" His voice cracked. "Who saved me?" The nurse hesitated. "An anonymous donor." She didn't want to be identified. Ethan's gaze drifted to the window, where thin streaks of sunlight cut through the blinds. A donor, a woman. Somewhere someone had given a piece of their body to a man they'd never met. "Anonymous," he whispered. The nurse smiled softly. "She didn't even ask for your name." He stared at the ceiling again, his eyes wet. "Someone gave me life, and wanted nothing back." It was the first time in years he had felt something that wasn't power or fear or exhaustion. It was humility. It was gratitude. The days passed slowly after that. Lily recovered in a small ward at Rhode Island General, walking the hallway in loose hospital socks, clutching the IV pole like a dance partner. Each step hurt, but it was a good kind of pain. The kind that meant she had done something that mattered. When Dr. Mason came to check on her, he smiled. "You're healing well. You'll have a small scar, but you'll be fine." Lily smiled weakly. "Scars are proof we were needed once." The doctor looked at her for a long moment and said, "That's a beautiful way to see it." On her third morning, she sat by the window as rain streaked down the glass, watching cars move along the wet street below. She thought about the man somewhere out there whose body now carried a piece of hers. Maybe he was old, maybe young, rich or poor. It didn't matter. What mattered was that he would see another sunrise. She took a slow breath, whispered to herself, "Be kind even when it hurts," and let the memory of her mother rest easy for the first time in years. She was discharged 2 days later. The nurse hugged her before she left, slipping a small card into her hand. "The hospital sends these to anonymous donors," she said. "You don't have to open it now." Lily waited until she was home before she did. The card was simple white with blue edges. Inside it read, "Thank you for giving life," where there was almost none left. "You'll never know the name, but the world will remember the kindness." She smiled faintly, folded the card, and tucked it inside a cookbook at the diner between pages she never used. Back in New York, Ethan's recovery was slower, but no less miraculous. He stayed in a private room, guarded by nurses who whispered about the billionaire who had nearly died and the mysterious donor who saved him. Visitors came and went, lawyers, assistants, shareholders. But Ethan spoke little. Each time someone mentioned luck or modern medicine, he shook his head. "It wasn't luck. Someone gave me their life." His assistant Marcus tried to lighten the mood. "We'll find her, sir, whoever she is." Ethan's expression darkened. No, she didn't want to be found. "And that's exactly why I need to honor her." The day he left the hospital, he paused in the hallway, looking through the window toward the city skyline. His reflection merged with the glass towers he had built, but for the first time, they didn't feel like accomplishments. They felt hollow. "Anonymous," he whispered again, testing the word. It didn't sound like a stranger. It sounded like grace. Meanwhile, Lily returned to her quiet life in Newport. The diner opened at 6, the regulars came for coffee, and life went on. She wore a light sweater over her uniform to hide the dressing near her ribs. But sometimes when she leaned over the counter, the ache reminded her that part of her was somewhere else, now keeping someone alive. No one knew, not even Rosa, who thought Lily's short absence was just a flu. "You look thinner," Rosa teased. "Too much coffee, not enough sleep." Lily smiled, something like that. That night, when the last customer left, she cleaned the counter and turned off the lights. Outside, the street lights shimmered on the wet pavement. She locked the door and stood there for a moment, listening to the distant hum of waves beyond the harbor. A sense of peace settled over her, not triumph, not pride, just quiet knowing. Somewhere out there, a man had opened his eyes again. Somewhere a heart was beating steady because of her. She didn't know his name. She didn't need to. The world was full of strangers, but sometimes, if you were lucky, kindness could find its way between them without needing to be seen. She walked home under the drizzle, her hand pressed gently to her side, the scar beneath her sweater warm against her skin. Behind her, the diner lights flickered off, one by one, until only the sign remained glowing faintly in the rain. Ethan Cole had once been called the Golden Architect of New York, a man who could turn empty land into shining towers. Every magazine cover showed him in perfect suits, eyes cold smile, practiced the kind of man people admired but never approached. Now lying on his couch at his penthouse overlooking the Hudson, he stared at the city lights without feeling anything at all. He was 35 alive and emptier than he had ever been. The doctors said the transplant had been a miracle. He should have been celebrating. Instead, he sat in silence, the ticking of an expensive clock, echoing across the marble floor. The walls were lined with awards contracts and memories of a life that used to matter. On the coffee table, a single photo frame faced him. Natalie's face, smiling in summer light, her hair tousled by the wind. She had been his fiancée, his anchor, until kidney failure had taken her 3 years ago. He had promised her that he would build something lasting, something meaningful. He kept the promise in the only way he knew, by building more towers, higher, richer, emptier. After her death, he buried himself in work, until even his assistant had stopped asking if he was okay. He wasn't. He had stopped being okay the day she stopped breathing. When the illness struck him 2 years later, it felt like justice. He didn't fight it at first. He simply accepted it, thinking maybe he had lived long enough. But then the donor came, a stranger who had no reason to save him, a woman who asked for nothing. Now he owed a debt he couldn't repay to someone he couldn't name. He got up, walking across the room. The floor-to-ceiling windows reflected his thin frame, the scars on his abdomen still healing. He touched them absent-mindedly, his fingers tracing the reminder of what had been taken and given back. "Someone gave me their life," he whispered, his voice cracked. Marcus, his assistant, entered quietly, holding a folder. "Mr. Cole, the foundation papers you asked for are ready." Ethan turned. "The foundation?" Marcus nodded. "The one you mentioned, second breath." Ethan took the folder, flipping through the pages. It outlined his plan to fund transplant programs and post-surgery care for uninsured donors. "I want this done," Ethan said. "No press, no publicity." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Sir, if people knew—" "They don't need to know," Ethan interrupted. "This isn't about image, it's about balance." Marcus hesitated, but nodded. When he left, Ethan sank back into his chair. Outside rain streaked the windows again, turning the skyline into a watercolor of light. He closed his eyes, hearing echoes of the hospital, the beeping monitors, the nurse's quiet voice, the words "anonymous donor." He wondered if she was out there somewhere, living an ordinary life, unaware that her kindness had brought him back. He didn't know what she looked like. Maybe she was young, maybe old, maybe someone who smiled easily, or someone who had seen too much loss. All he knew was that she existed, and that was enough to make him want to live differently. Days turned into weeks. Ethan returned to work, but the board noticed he was different. The sharpness that once defined him had softened. He no longer raised his voice, no longer cared for endless profits. During meetings, he found himself staring out the window, wondering how many stories were unfolding across the city. People struggling, waiting, hoping. He started visiting hospitals quietly, writing checks under different names, sitting in waiting rooms where no one recognized him. It was strange how peace lived in the smallest places. One evening, he walked through the transplant ward of New York General. The nurse recognized him and smiled. "You shouldn't be on your feet too long, Mr. Cole." He nodded. "I'm fine." His eyes wandered to a young girl reading by the window, a dialysis line taped to her arm. Her mother sat beside her, humming softly. Something about that simple scene, the closeness, the patience, made his throat tighten. As he left, he told the nurse, "Make sure they get what they need." She blinked, confused. "Sir?" He handed her a card. "Second Breath Foundation. Tell them they're covered." That night, he stood on the balcony of his penthouse, the wind cold against his face. Below, New York pulsed with life. Somewhere among those millions of souls was the woman who had chosen to save his. He could have hired investigators, demanded names, used his influence to break hospital confidentiality. But he didn't. He couldn't. To search for her would betray the purity of her gift. Instead, he began to write letters. He would never send one every week. In them, he told her about the world she had saved, about the second chances she had unknowingly created. "I don't know who you are," one letter said, "but every breath I take belongs partly to you." I used to think love was something to own. Now I know it's something to honor. He kept the letters in a drawer tied with a ribbon beside Natalie's old photograph. When Marcus found them one morning, he said quietly, "You should give these to her someday." Ethan smiled faintly. Maybe, or maybe they're just reminders that I'm still human. Weeks later, as the winter snow began to fall over Manhattan, Ethan attended the opening of the first clinic funded by his foundation. Cameras flashed, reporters asked questions, but he stayed silent. Behind the scenes, he signed a check for $1 million and slipped away before anyone noticed. He drove that night without direction, heading north along the coast, following the highway, until the lights of New York faded behind him. He didn't know why, only that something pulled him toward the ocean, toward quiet. In the darkness, his mind returned to that faceless woman, the one whose heartbeat now echoed faintly inside his own. Somewhere, maybe, she was watching the same moon, living an ordinary life, unaware that she had brought a man who had forgotten how to live back to himself. The first morning back at the Harbor Light Diner felt strange, as if the walls themselves knew Lily had changed. The hum of the coffee machines, the chatter of the regulars, the smell of bacon and toast, it was all the same, yet somehow quieter, softer. She moved carefully her hand, brushing her side now and then, where a faint ache reminded her that a part of her was missing, and somewhere else it was keeping a stranger alive. Rosa, the owner, noticed the way Lily's movements had slowed. "You sure you're okay, sweetheart?" she asked while wiping down the counter. Lily smiled. "I'm fine, just haven't had enough coffee yet." Rosa laughed. "You and me both." Outside, the harbor shimmered under a pale sun, the kind that never quite broke through the morning clouds. Fishermen hauled crates from their boats. Seagulls screamed overhead, and tourists wandered the docks with paper cups in hand. It was the same rhythm Lily had always known, but she moved through it like a ghost returning home. The scar under her sweater tugged when she bent to pour coffee for Mr. Patterson, one of the old regulars who came in every morning at 8. "You look thinner," he said, peering at her over his glasses. "You need to eat more pie." "Maybe later," she said with a grin. "You want the usual?" He nodded, then pointed toward the small television mounted in the corner near the register. "Turn that up, would you?" "They're talking about that billionaire guy again." Lily glanced at the screen. A news anchor stood in front of a hospital, speaking into the camera with rehearsed sympathy. "Ethan Cole, CEO of Cole Industries, has made what doctors call a miraculous recovery following a critical kidney transplant. The identity of the donor remains confidential, but sources confirm the surgery was performed just 2 weeks ago." Lily froze the coffee pot halfway to the cup. The sound of clinking dishes and rain against the window faded as she stared at the screen. Ethan Cole. The same name from the radio. The man whose life had depended on someone's decision. Rosa came over, following Lily's gaze. "That man owes his life to someone he'll never meet," she said. "Makes you think, huh? What would it feel like to know you're alive because of a stranger?" Lily forced a smile, her throat tight. It must feel like a miracle. She turned back to her work, pretending not to hear the rest of the segment. The anchor spoke of wealth and recovery, of a man who had survived against all odds. But all Lily heard was the echo of her own voice on the phone. "If it can save someone, that's enough." That night after closing, she sat alone at the counter with a cup of tea. The diner was silent except for the sound of rain sliding down the windows. She traced circles on the countertop, staring at her reflection in the glass door. There was no sign of what she had done. The world looked unchanged, and yet, somewhere far away, it wasn't. She wondered if he knew. She wondered if he cared. Then she caught herself and laughed softly. Of course he didn't know. That was the point. The next morning the diner was busier. Tourists from Boston stopped by drenched from the sea air, asking for clam chowder. A truck driver forgot to tip a child-spilled orange juice. Rosa burned her hand and swore softly under her breath. Life went on. When the lunch rush ended, Lily stepped outside for a breath of air. The ocean breeze hit her face sharp and salty, bringing tears to her eyes. She looked toward the lighthouse at the end of the pier, the one her mother used to take her to when she was little. "When you're lost, look for the light," her mother had said. The words came back to her now like a whisper. That night she walked home along the wet streets. Her apartment was small, one room above the florist's shop, filled with books and plants she often forgot to water. She heated a can of soup, curled up on the couch, and opened the small card from the hospital again. The edges were worn now, the ink slightly smudged from where her fingers had touched it too many times. "You'll never know the name, but the world will remember the kindness." She smiled faintly and placed it back under her lamp. She didn't know what kind of man Ethan Cole was. Maybe he was grateful, maybe he had already forgotten. Either way, she didn't regret what she had done. The next week passed quietly until one afternoon, Rosa turned up the television again. "Look at this," she said, motioning toward the screen. The same man appeared, but this time he wasn't in a hospital gown. Ethan Cole stood before a row of microphones speaking at a press conference. He looked tall, composed, but there was something different in his face, something human. "I want to thank the doctors and the donor who made this possible," he said. "Their selflessness reminds me that no fortune or success is greater than the value of life itself." His voice trembled slightly on the last words. Lily stood frozen, her eyes fixed on the screen. There was something raw in the way he spoke, something unpolished. She felt a strange flutter in her chest. Not pride, not curiosity, but a quiet connection, as if she were listening to someone who unknowingly carried a piece of her soul. The camera cut away to a crowd of reporters, shouting questions, and the moment ended. Rosa sighed. "You think people like him really mean what they say?" Lily hesitated. "Maybe, sometimes they do." She turned away, but inside something shifted. For the first time since the surgery, she allowed herself to imagine the man who now carried her kidney. She pictured him standing in front of flashing lights, a world watching, unaware that the thing keeping him alive came from a waitress who served coffee by the sea. The thought didn't make her proud, it made her strangely calm. Later that night, as she locked up the diner, the neon sign flickered above, her soft blue light spelling out Harbor Light Diner. The reflection shimmered on the wet pavement like a second world beneath her feet. She looked up at the sky, whispered quietly, "Wherever you are, I hope you're okay," and walked home under the mist. What she didn't know was that hundreds of miles away, in a high-rise office overlooking the city, Ethan Cole stood by his window at that exact moment, staring into the rain, wondering about the anonymous woman who had given him his second breath. The first time Ethan Cole drove through Newport, he didn't plan to stop. The coastal town was quiet, modest, the kind of place his old life would have overlooked entirely. He was there to inspect one of his company's new charitable projects, a small rehabilitation wing being built at a local hospital under the Second Breath Foundation. It was meant to be a quiet visit, no cameras, no meetings, just numbers and contracts. But when he pulled off the main road for coffee, fate intervened. The Harbor Light Diner stood at the edge of the harbor, its faded sign glowing faintly under the morning sun. It looked nothing like the sleek cafes of Manhattan, but something about the place drew him in. The smell of brewed coffee and butter filled the air as he stepped inside. A bell rang above the door. Behind the counter, a young woman in a pale blue apron looked up. "Good morning," she said, her voice warm but tired. "Sit anywhere you like." Ethan chose a booth by the window. He had intended to order quickly pay and leave, but when she approached, something about her stopped him. She was ordinary and beautiful in the quiet way light is beautiful on water. Her eyes carried both exhaustion and peace, and when she smiled, the corners of his chest tightened unexpectedly. "Coffee?" she asked. "Please," he said. She poured it steady and sure, the steam curling between them. "Cream or black?" he replied, then added after a pause, "But you can surprise me." She smiled faintly, a trace of amusement in her eyes. "Surprise you? That's risky. I can handle risk," he said, and she laughed softly before walking away. The sound lingered longer than it should have. He stirred his coffee, watching her move behind the counter. There was a grace to her, a quietness that didn't belong to this noisy world. He didn't know, her name didn't need to. For some reason, he wanted to stay just a little longer. When she brought his breakfast, he noticed a faint scar near her wrist, small but distinct, as if from surgery. His mind flickered briefly to his own hidden beneath his shirt, a matching reminder of the gift that had saved him. He shook the thought away. Coincidence, that's all it was. Yet something in him kept watching her, wondering why her presence felt strangely familiar, like a memory he couldn't place. "You visiting or just passing through?" she asked as she placed his plate down. "A bit of both," he said. "Work brings me places I don't expect. You a contractor?" Something like that. He didn't lie, but he didn't explain. The last thing he wanted was for people to see him as Ethan Cole, the billionaire whose name filled newspapers. He wanted to be just a man having breakfast by the sea. She nodded, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "Well, welcome to Newport. We don't get many travelers this time of year." He smiled. "Then I'm lucky." She blushed faintly, not sure if he was being polite or sincere. When she left, he found himself watching her again, the way she leaned slightly toward older customers, the way her smile softened when she listened. Every movement spoke of patience and quiet strength. He finished his coffee, but didn't leave. Instead, he ordered another cup just to stay longer. He returned the next morning and the one after that. Each time she greeted him with the same calm tone, not recognizing the man who had been on national news just weeks before. To her, he was just another face passing through, and that anonymity felt like freedom. Sometimes he caught her glancing toward the window, as if lost in thought, and he wondered what she saw out there beyond the harbor. He wanted to ask her name, but something held him back. The fear of breaking the fragile peace her presence gave him. One afternoon, as the light turned golden over the docks, Rosa wiped her hands on her apron and said to Lily, "Your new customer's back again. He's been here 3 days straight. You sure he's not secretly writing a review?" Lily laughed. He's quiet enough to be a ghost. Maybe he just likes the view. Or maybe he likes you, Rosa teased. Lily rolled her eyes. You think everyone who orders coffee likes me? That's because they do, Rosa said with a wink before walking away. Across the diner, Ethan tried not to smile. He caught fragments of their voices, feeling absurdly like a schoolboy overhearing gossip. When Lily came to refill his cup, he said quietly, You must own this place by now. You run everything. She laughed softly. I wish. It belongs to Rosa. I just keep the coffee warm. You do more than that, he said. She raised an eyebrow. You sound sure of it. I've watched people long enough to know when they make others feel seen, he replied. The comment made her pause. For a moment, neither spoke. Then she smiled faintly, deflecting the tension with humor. That's a nice thing to say, stranger. Maybe I'm just returning the kindness, he said. She didn't know what he meant, and he didn't explain. When he finally left, she stood by the window, watching his car disappear down the road toward the sea cliffs. Something about him unsettled her, not in a dangerous way, but in the way old songs do, familiar and haunting at once. That night, she dreamt of water of heartbeats echoing through rain. Ethan sat in his car for a long time before starting the engine. He couldn't understand why he'd come back again, or why the sight of her felt like a fragment of something sacred. He told himself it was just gratitude for being alive, the awareness of how precious human kindness could be. But deep down, he knew it was more. There was something about that diner, that woman, that quiet harbor town that made the world feel human again. He drove to his hotel, the image of her eyes lingering in his mind. The next morning, he was back at the diner before sunrise, sitting in his usual booth by the window as the first light touched the waves. She appeared a few minutes later, surprised to see him so early. You're persistent, she said, smiling as she tied her apron. I've been accused of worse, he replied. She poured him coffee, and for the first time their eyes met and stayed. Outside, the gulls circled over the gray sea, and inside, for one suspended moment, it felt as if the noise of the world had finally gone quiet. The storm rolled in, without warning. By the time evening fell, rain had swallowed Newport whole. The Harbor Light Diner glowed like a small lantern against the gray, its windows fogged from the heat inside. Lily wiped down the counters, humming softly under her breath, while Rosa finished counting the register. You can go, honey, Rosa said, stretching. No one's coming out in this weather. Lily shook her head. I'll stay a bit longer, just in case someone needs a warm meal. Rosa smiled knowingly. Someone like that quiet man who keeps sitting by the window. Lily laughed but didn't answer. When Rosa left, the diner fell into silence, except for the drumming of rain against the roof. Outside, the world was blurred and silver, the kind of night where even light looked lost. A flash of headlights appeared through the curtain of rain, then a familiar car parked near the entrance. Ethan stepped out his jacket, already soaked through, and hurried inside. The bell above the door rang weakly. You again? Lily said, smiling. I was starting to think you lived here. Not yet, he replied, shaking rain from his hair. But I couldn't drive in this without stopping. Thought I'd check if the coffee was still as good as yesterday. Still the same beans, same pot, she said. You might be disappointed. Never, he said quietly. Something in his tone made her pause, but she turned away, pretending not to notice. She poured him a cup and placed it before him. You're drenched. You want a towel? He nodded, water dripping from his sleeve. She disappeared into the back, returned with an old dish towel, and handed it to him. "Thanks," he said. "You don't have to stay open for me." "You're not keeping me," she said. "The rain is." They both smiled faintly. The lights flickered once dimming under the storm's pressure. He looked around the diner, the old photographs of fishermen, the chipped blue booths, the clock that always ran 5 minutes slow. It was simple, imperfect, alive. He envied that. "You ever think about leaving?" he asked suddenly. She glanced up from wiping a table. "Leaving Newport sometimes, but the world outside seems too big for me." "Too big or too empty?" he asked. She tilted her head. "Maybe both." The air between them grew quiet. The storm outside roared louder wind, shaking the glass. A leak began near the window, water dripping steadily onto the floor. Great Lily muttered, grabbing a bucket. Ethan stood. "Let me help." "You don't have to." But he was already moving, holding up the corner of the awning outside as she dragged the bucket beneath. Rain drenched them both instantly. The fabric of her sweater clung to her skin. Her hair plastered to her cheeks. She laughed, half exasperated, half amused. "You're going to catch pneumonia." "Then at least I'll have good company," he said, his voice raised over the storm. The awning slipped from his grip, splashing water across both of them. She squealed, stepping back, and he caught her elbow instinctively. For a second they froze close enough to hear each other's breaths, the rain pounding all around. That was when he saw it. Her shirt had lifted slightly as she reached for the awning again, revealing a faint scar just below her ribs, pale and crescent-shaped. The same place. The exact same place. His heartbeat stopped. She noticed his sudden stillness and looked down. For a moment she didn't understand, then realization dawned. She pulled her sweater down quickly, eyes wide. "It's nothing," she said. "An old surgery." He stared at her, rain dripping from his hair to his eyes. The pieces clicked together with terrifying precision. The timing, the city, the blood type, the warmth he had felt since the first day he saw her. It wasn't coincidence. It was her. She was the one. "Lily," he whispered. She blinked, startled. "How do you know my name?" "The waitress tag," he said quickly, covering his mistake, but his voice shook. His mind raced, caught between gratitude and disbelief. She turned to go back inside, unaware that the man beside her was the one who carried her gift inside him. He followed quiet, watching her move behind the counter, every gesture magnified by the stormlight. She poured him another coffee, her hands trembling slightly. "You okay?" she asked. "You look like you've seen a ghost." "Maybe I have," he said softly. She laughed nervously. "Don't say that. This place already looks haunted when it rains." "No," he said, his voice breaking. "It's not haunted. It's blessed." She frowned, unsure how to respond. He forced a smile, trying to hide the weight of what he now knew. The secret sat between them, heavy and fragile. He wanted to tell her everything, that he was the man whose life she had saved, that every breath he took since that day had carried her in it, but the words wouldn't come. Gratitude this immense didn't fit inside language. As he looked at her, he realized that nothing he could say would be enough. She wiped her hands on her apron, trying to shake off the unease. "You sure you're okay?" "I'm fine," he said, just realizing how small the world really is. She smiled faintly, her eyes soft again. "It can be smaller than you think." He nodded, finishing his coffee slowly. When he finally stood to leave, the rain had softened to a drizzle. She walked him to the door. "Drive safe," she said. "Storms like this make people reckless." "I'll be careful," he said. Then, almost as an afterthought, "Thank you for staying open." "It's what I do," she said with a smile. "Keep the light on for whoever needs it." He looked at her, the words catching in his throat. "You have no idea how much that means." When he stepped outside, the air was cold and clean. He stood by his car for a long moment, staring back at the diner through the rain. Her silhouette moved softly behind the fogged window, wiping tables, humming a song he couldn't hear. His chest ached with something he couldn't name. As he drove away, his reflection flickered in the windshield, pale and haunted by truth. The windshield wipers kept time with his heartbeat. "She saved me," he whispered to himself. "And she doesn't even know." The road blurred with rain lights stretching into streaks of gold and gray. Behind him, the diner's neon sign glowed faintly against the storm like a heartbeat in the dark. He pressed his hand against his side, feeling the scar beneath his shirt, the same shape as hers, and whispered to the night, "How do you thank someone who never wanted to be found? The secret might have stayed hidden if not for one careless whisper." It began in a hospital hallway 2 weeks later, when a junior nurse at New York General mentioned the words "female donor from Rhode Island" to a journalist who had once dated her. By morning, the news had spread like fire. "The waitress who saved a billionaire." The headlines screamed. Photos of the Harbor Light Diner appeared on every gossip site, grainy and cruel. Lily Monroe's name was suddenly everywhere, plastered beside Ethan Cole's face. Her life dissected by strangers who thought kindness must have an agenda. She didn't know any of it until Rosa burst into the diner waving her phone. "Lily? Oh God, honey, it's you." Lily froze mid-step. "What are you talking about?" Rosa turned the screen toward her. There it was, a headline, her photo from Facebook. The words beneath it impossible to look at. Her stomach dropped. "No," she whispered. "That can't be real," but it was. Within hours, reporters arrived, cameras flashing questions, shouted lies multiplying faster than she could breathe. "Did you plan this? Were you paid to donate? Are you and Mr. Cole romantically involved?" She backed away, eyes wide, shaking her head. "No, please, it wasn't like that. I didn't even know him." But no one listened. They never do when truth is quieter than gossip. Rosa tried to block the door, yelling at them to leave. But one of the photographers shoved past, knocking over a tray of coffee cups. The hot liquid splashed across the floor, soaking Lily's shoes. She stumbled back, trembling her hands, shaking so badly she could barely breathe. "Get out," Rosa shouted. "She's not your story." The reporters finally retreated, but the damage was done. The diner, once her safe place, had turned into a circus. By sunset, customers stopped coming. Strangers online called her a liar, a gold digger, a manipulator. Someone even posted her address. The phone rang nonstop, some calls cruel, others threatening. Rosa unplugged it. "Don't read any of it, honey," she said, holding Lily's trembling hands. "The truth always finds a way through the noise." But Lily's eyes were vacant. "What truth? They've already decided who I am." Meanwhile, in Manhattan, Ethan Cole was reading the same headlines, fury building like a storm inside him. He slammed the paper onto his desk, veins visible at his temple. "Who leaked this?" he demanded. Marcus, standing near the window, looked pale. "They're saying someone at the hospital talked. It's spreading fast." Ethan paced. "Call every outlet. I want a full statement." They're not going to destroy her for something pure. Ethan Marcus said quietly, "Maybe staying silent is better. If you speak, they'll twist it more." Ethan glared. Silence is what created this. He grabbed his coat. "Get the car." Within hours, he was in Newport. The rain had stopped, but the sky was still heavy, the air damp with the scent of sea and shame. When he stepped inside the diner, it was empty. Lily stood behind the counter, wiping the same glass over and over, as if doing so could erase the noise outside. She looked up when he entered, her eyes widening. "You shouldn't be here," she said quietly. "I had to," he replied. "This isn't fair to you." "Fair." She let out a hollow laugh. "Look around, Ethan. They took everything from me. My job, my peace, my privacy. Then let me fix it." "You can't," she said, her voice breaking. "This isn't one of your business deals. You can't throw money at it and make it disappear." He took a step closer. "I'm not trying to buy silence. I'm trying to protect you." "Protect me," she repeated, tears welling. "From what? The truth I donated, because it was the right thing to do. I didn't even know who you were." "I know," he said softly. "And that's what makes them wrong." She shook her head. "You shouldn't have come. Every camera in this state will be following you. If they see you here, it'll only make things worse." "I don't care," he said. "You gave me my life. I won't watch them tear yours apart." Her voice trembled. "Then don't watch. Just go." She turned away, her hands gripping the counter so tightly her knuckles turned white. He stood there silent, the weight of guilt crushing his chest. He wanted to tell her that he hadn't wanted her name to leak, that he'd planned to protect her anonymity forever, but words felt useless now. Every truth he spoke sounded like a lie against the noise of headlines and hashtags. "Lily," he said softly, "I can make a statement. I can tell them you never asked for a thing, that you didn't even know who I was. And they'll twist it," she said bitterly. "They'll say you're trying to cover for me, or worse, that it was all planned. You can't win against a story people want to believe." She walked past him toward the door, her voice quieter now. "You need to leave, Ethan, please." He hesitated, then nodded slowly. "If that's what you want." "It's what's best," she said, though. Her voice broke on the last word. When the door closed behind him, she pressed her back to it, shaking. Rosa emerged from the kitchen, eyes wet. "Honey?" Lily shook her head. "No, no tears. If I start, I won't stop." That night, she packed her things and left the apartment above the florist. Newport had turned from home to headline, from comfort to cage. She boarded a bus heading north, watching raindrops race down the window as the town faded behind her. In Manhattan, Ethan released a statement the next morning. His voice was steady, but his eyes looked hollow as he faced the cameras. "Lily Monroe is the reason I'm standing here today. She asked for nothing. She wanted no attention, no reward. If you truly believe in kindness, let her live in peace. The press didn't stop. They never do." The more he defended her, the more they twisted, his words turning compassion into scandal. Lily saw it all from a small motel room 3 towns away, the television flickering in the dark. She watched his face as he spoke, earnest, angry, broken, and turned the volume down. "Don't defend me," she whispered to the screen. "This is my mess, not your PR issue." Then she switched the TV off and sat in silence, the glow of the screen fading from her eyes. Outside, rain began to fall again, steady and relentless, like the world was trying to wash away everything that had gone wrong. The following days blurred into one long silence. The internet had moved on, as it always did, but the damage remained. The world forgot fast. People didn't. Lily stayed in a rented room above a bookstore in Providence, working mornings stacking boxes and avoiding mirrors. The smell of paper and dust was comforting. Books didn't ask questions, didn't stare. She read during breaks, mostly stories about faraway places, anything that didn't sound like her life. Some nights she'd walk to the waterfront and sit alone watching lights shimmer across the bay. She thought about the diner, about Rosa, about the way things could shatter overnight when kindness met publicity. And though she didn't want to admit it, she thought about him, Ethan. Somewhere in Manhattan, he was probably fighting fires his PR team couldn't control. She could still hear his voice that last night in the diner. "You gave me life. Let me give you peace." It had sounded like a promise, but promises meant nothing against the weight of the world. One evening she returned from work to find an envelope slipped under her door. No name, no stamp. Inside was a folded letter in neat handwriting. "Lily, I don't know where you went, but I hope you're safe. They can't understand what you did because they've never known grace without a price tag. Don't let their noise drown out your light. I'm still trying to make things right. E." She sat on her bed staring at the page until her vision blurred. For the first time in weeks, she let herself cry. It wasn't the loud, desperate kind of crying, just quiet tears that tasted like salt and relief. She folded the letter carefully and placed it inside the same hospital card she had kept since the surgery. 2 pieces of paper, 2 halves of a truth the world would never see. The next day she visited Dr. Mason at the hospital in Providence. He had been the one who coordinated the surgery, the only person who knew both names. "Lily," he said softly when she walked into his office, "I was hoping you'd come. I needed to ask you something." She said, her voice small. "If I disappear, completely change my number, move away, can they still use my name in their stories?" The doctor looked at her sadly. "You can disappear from the world, but not from what you've done. You can't erase kindness, Lily. It leaves a mark." She nodded, tears threatening again. "Sometimes I wish it didn't." "That mark isn't a burden," he said gently. "It's proof that what you did mattered." She looked down at her hands. "I just wanted to help. I never wanted any of this." "The world rarely rewards quiet goodness," he replied, "but that doesn't make it less good." Later that night, she stood outside the hospital, the air cool and damp. The city lights reflected on puddles, and somewhere church bells chimed faintly. Her phone buzzed an unknown number. She hesitated, then answered. "Lily," his voice came through low and careful. "It's me." Her heart lurched. "Ethan." "How did you get this number, Dr. Mason?" he admitted. "Don't be mad at him," I begged. She closed her eyes. "You shouldn't have called." "I had to," he said. "I can't let this end like that." "It already did," she whispered. "The world decided what I am, and now I have to live with it." "You don't," he said. "You can start over. Let me help." "You can't fix this," she said softly. "I'm not something to fix." "Then let me try to understand," he said, his voice breaking. "You gave me life, Lily. You don't get to vanish and pretend that didn't happen." "I didn't do it for you." She snapped, her control slipping. "I did it because my mother died waiting for a donor. I did it because no one should have to lose someone they love like that. I didn't do it for gratitude or fame or your guilt." There was a long pause. Then he said quietly, "Maybe not, but you still saved me. And I can't go back to pretending I don't owe that to someone real." Her breath trembled. "You don't owe me anything, Ethan. That's the point. I owe you peace, he said, and I'm not leaving until I give it to you. You don't even know what peace means for me, she whispered. Maybe I don't, he replied, but I'd rather try and fail than watch you disappear because of something beautiful. She couldn't answer. The silence stretched until she finally said, Don't come here. I'm already outside, he said. She froze. Slowly she turned toward the window. Across the street, under the glow of a street lamp, he stood his coat, soaked his face pale but determined. He didn't move closer, as if afraid she'd run. The sight of him made her chest ache, and her anger melt at the same time. You shouldn't be here, she said through the glass. You'll only make things worse, maybe, he said. But I needed to see you. She stepped outside, the wind cold against her face. They stood a few feet apart, the noise of passing cars fading into the background. Why, she asked quietly, why can't you just let me go? Because you're the reason I want to live, he said simply. The words hung between them raw and real. Ethan, she began, but he cut her off gently. You gave me life, let me give you peace. She shook her head. I didn't do it for peace. I did it to stop someone else from losing theirs. He looked at her for a long moment, rain beginning to fall again, each drop glinting under the light. Then maybe we're both trying to heal things we can't fix, he said quietly. She swallowed hard tears mixing with rain. Then maybe we should stop trying. She turned and walked away before he could answer. He didn't follow. He just stood there, the rain, soaking his suit, his breath visible in the cold air. When she reached the corner, she looked back once. He was still there, motionless, a silhouette under the streetlight. For a moment she wanted to run to him, to let the world burn, and choose the one person who had made it feel alive again. But she didn't. Instead, she kept walking. The sound of her footsteps faded into the night, leaving him alone with the rain and the memory of everything they couldn't say. 3 months passed, and the world had changed its outrage to another scandal, another name. But Ethan Cole had been quietly building something behind closed doors. A foundation, a movement, a message that no headline could twist. The Life Exchange Initiative was to be unveiled at the annual National Health and Humanity Gala, an event filled with CEOs, politicians, philanthropists, and cameras waiting for a spectacle. For him, it wasn't about reputation anymore. It was about redemption. The night was glittering, the ballroom glowing under chandeliers. Every inch of the place whispered money and image. But for once, Ethan felt detached from it all. He adjusted his tie in the mirror and looked at his reflection, wondering how much of the man who had once ruled the skyline still remained. His assistant Marcus approached quietly. "You're sure about this?" "Completely," Ethan said. "It's time." Outside the hall, a storm threatened the horizon. Thunder rolling faintly in the distance. Inside, the air buzzed with whispers. When Ethan entered, conversations fell to a hush. He walked past clusters of people who once called him ruthless, emotionless, heartless. And tonight they all stared with curiosity. He took the stage as the orchestra faded. Cameras clicked. He looked across the room, scanning faces, but she wasn't there. He had hoped foolishly that she might be even just in the shadows. "Thank you all for coming," he began. His voice was calm, steady. "Most of you know me as the man behind Coal Industries, the numbers, the buildings, the profit margins. But that's not who I am anymore." A murmur rippled through the crowd. "A year ago I was dying," he continued. "My body was failing, my spirit already gone. I had everything and nothing at the same time. No family left, no reason to keep fighting. And then someone somewhere gave me life. He paused, letting the words sink in. The room was silent. That someone didn't know me, didn't ask for anything, didn't even want to be found. She gave and walked away. And the world tried to twist that act of grace into something it wasn't. His jaw tightened slightly. But tonight I want to change that story. He stepped off the podium, the microphone wire stretching as the crowd parted for him. Cameras followed. Murmurs turned to gasps. He stopped near the back where a woman stood half hidden near the exit doors. Lily froze. She hadn't meant to be there. Rosa had convinced her, "You can't keep running from your own kindness, honey." She had arrived unnoticed wearing the same navy dress she had worn to her mother's memorial, simple and quiet among diamonds and silk. And now the man she had tried to disappear from was walking toward her, his gaze fixed and unflinching. "That stranger," he said, his voice carrying across the ballroom, "is here tonight." All eyes turned to her. The spotlight followed. Her breath caught in her chest. She shook her head slightly, whispering, "Ethan, no." But he extended his hand. "Please," he said softly, "walk with me." Trembling, she placed her hand in his. The crowd held its breath as he led her to the stage. Once there, he turned to face everyone. "You called her a gold digger," he said firmly. "A liar, a manipulator. You took something pure and made it ugly, because the truth was too simple to believe. But the truth is this: she gave a piece of herself to save a stranger. And that stranger was me." The silence that followed was electric, a heartbeat, stretching through 1,000 stunned faces. He looked at Lily, his expression softening. "You didn't just save my life," he said, his voice breaking slightly. "You saved my heart. You taught it how to love again." Tears welled in her eyes. The crowd, cold, skeptical, judgmental, broke. Applause erupted, rising like a wave. People stood clapping, crying. Reporters lowered their cameras. For once, there was no scandal to capture, only truth. Ethan took Lily's trembling hand and pressed it to his chest. She felt the rhythm beneath, steady and real. He leaned in, whispering, so only she could hear. "You told me you didn't want peace, so let me give you something else, freedom." She shook her head, smiling through tears. "You're impossible. And you're the reason I'm alive," he replied. "That makes us even." When the applause finally faded, Ethan introduced the foundation. The Life Exchange Initiative will fund full transplant procedures for patients without insurance and provide recovery care for donors who give without expectation. No names, no fame, just second chances. The audience erupted again, this time in support. Flashbulbs popped, but for once they didn't sting. The story was finally his to tell and hers to reclaim. When the ceremony ended, Lily slipped away to the balcony overlooking the city. The night air was cool, and the storm had finally broken rain, whispering against the glass. She stood there overwhelmed. The door opened behind her. Ethan joined her quietly, holding 2 glasses of champagne. "You disappeared before I could thank you properly," he said. "You already did," she murmured, "up there, in front of everyone." He shook his head. "That was for them. This is for me." He handed her the glass. "To life," he said. "To second chances," she replied softly. They clinked glasses. For a moment the world outside the lights, the noise, the chaos disappeared. It was just them standing in the rain, 2 people stitched together by fate and choice. "I never wanted any of this," she said quietly. "The fame, the attention. I know," he said, "but maybe it was never about what you wanted." Maybe it was about what the world needed to see, that kindness still exists. She looked at him, her expression soft. "And what do you need, Ethan?" He smiled faintly. "To stop running from the life you gave me." She exhaled a long, trembling breath and leaned against the railing. "So what happens now?" "Now," he said, looking out over the city, "we build something that lasts longer than either of us." "A legacy?" she asked. "A home," he said, "for people who believe in giving without asking why." She turned to face him, rain glistening in her hair, eyes reflecting the city lights. "You really think we can do that?" "We already did," he said softly. And for the first time she believed him. Somewhere below, the city kept moving, unaware that two lives had just changed again. Not through fate this time, but through choice. And under the rain, their story found its redemption. The morning light spilled gently across the coast of Newport, warm and golden, catching the curve of the waves as they touched the shore. A year had passed since that night at the gala, and the world had changed quietly, almost imperceptibly, like the tide reshaping sand while no one watched. The headlines had faded long ago, replaced by other stories, other names. But for Ethan Cole and Lily Monroe, the noise had settled into something simple, something real. Their house sat on a bluff overlooking the sea, painted white with blue shutters, its porch wrapped in flowering vines. The locals called it the Harbor Lighthouse, a name that had stuck after they founded the Harbor Light Foundation, a program that offered financial and emotional support for transplant donors and recipients across the country. Every week, letters arrived from people whose lives had been changed by the foundation. A mother in Ohio who finally received a kidney, a teenager in Montana who could now afford recovery care, a widow in Texas who had donated her husband's liver and found solace in knowing his life continued elsewhere. Lily kept every letter in a wooden box by the window, reading them on quiet mornings while Ethan made coffee. That morning, the smell of fresh brew mingled with sea air as she stepped outside, mug in hand, the wind tugging playfully at her hair. Ethan was already there, tightening a loose screw on the old lantern that sat on their porch railing, the same antique he'd found at a flea market and insisted on restoring. "You and that lamp," she teased softly. "One day I'll wake up and find you polishing it in your sleep." "It's not just a lamp," he said without looking up. "It's a symbol." Of what, she asked. He straightened, smiling. "Of how you keep saving me in small ways every day." She rolled her eyes but smiled anyway, walking over to rest her head on his shoulder. "You still say the cheesiest things, and you still fall for them," he murmured, kissing the top of her head. She laughed quietly. The gulls cried overhead, the waves below whispering against the cliffs. It was peace, not the kind she had once run from, but the kind she had built with her own hands. Later that day, they drove into town for a foundation board meeting. The old diner where everything began had been rebuilt after a storm the previous winter, its neon sign now glowing brighter than ever. Rosa still ran the place, and every time Lily visited, she refused to let her pay for coffee. "You gave me free publicity," Rosa would say, laughing. "Half of America wants to eat here because of you." This time was no different. As soon as Lily and Ethan stepped in, Rosa came around the counter, wiping her hands on her apron. "Well, if it isn't my favorite miracle workers," she said, pulling Lily into a hug. "How's my favorite billionaire behaving?" "Barely," Lily said, smiling. Ethan chuckled. "You wound me, Miss Monroe." Rosa winked. "Keep him grounded, honey." They sat in their old booth by the window, the same one where Ethan had first stared at her without knowing why. Now it felt sacred somehow. Ethan sipped his coffee and glanced at the walls where framed photos of the diner's history now hung alongside one new addition, a black and white picture of him and Lily at the foundation launch, smiling under a banner that read, "It didn't start with love, it started with life." He stared at it for a long moment before saying softly, "You realize you've turned this town into a legend." "No," Lily said, looking out the window toward the harbor. "We just reminded people that good things still happen." That afternoon, they drove back to the coast for a donor ceremony, a private event they hosted every year to honor families and survivors. The foundation's main office overlooked the sea, its glass walls filled with light. Inside, portraits lined the hallway, a mother and son, a young soldier, a nurse in scrubs. The plaque beneath read, "The Hall of Second Chances." Lily walked slowly down that hallway, fingertips brushing each frame. Every story carried a heartbeat, a reminder of why they had begun. Ethan followed, watching her. When she stopped before a new portrait, a young woman and an older man holding hands after surgery, he said quietly, "You still think about them, don't you?" She nodded. "Every single one." "You can't save everyone," he said gently. "Maybe not," she replied, "but I can try." After the ceremony, the sun began to dip, painting the sky in hues of amber and violet. They returned home where the ocean stretched endlessly before them, and for the first time in a while, there was no schedule, no camera, no speech. Just two people and the sound of the waves. Lily stood at the porch railing, watching seagulls dip and soar. "Do you ever think about that night?" she asked softly. "The rain, the diner, the moment you realized." Ethan smiled faintly. "Every time it rains." "And if you could go back," she said, "would you change it?" He looked at her for a long moment, his gaze steady and full. "Not a thing. Because every wrong turn, every storm, every scar led me here to you." She felt tears prick her eyes. "You know, I used to think love was supposed to be perfect. Now I think it's just supposed to be true." "Exactly," he said. "And ours was built on truth, on something real." He reached into his pocket, then his expression shifting slightly. "Speaking of real," he said, pulling out a small velvet box. She froze. "Ethan, I was going to wait until our next gala," he said, stepping closer. But that felt too public, too loud. This, he gestured around them, the sea, the sky, their home. "This is where everything began again." He dropped to one knee, the setting sun, casting a halo of light behind him. "You gave me more than a kidney, Lily," he said softly. "You gave me a reason to live again. You never asked for thanks, never asked for anything. But I have something to ask you." He opened the box. Inside was a simple, elegant ring. Nothing flashy, just timeless like them. "Lily Monroe," he said, his voice trembling slightly. "Will you marry me?" For a second the world went still, the waves, the wind, the light. Then she laughed through her tears, covering her mouth. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, of course I will." He stood, and she threw her arms around him, their laughter mixing with the rhythm of the ocean. They stayed like that for a long time, holding on as the first stars appeared above the horizon. Later, as twilight deepened, Ethan walked to the small garden near the porch where a Japanese maple stood, the same kind Lily had planted at the hospital after her surgery. He carried a small sapling in his hands. "What's that?" she asked. "A sister tree," he said, "for new beginnings." Together they knelt and planted it beside the old one, their fingers brushing through the cool earth. When they were done, he brushed dirt from her hand and pointed to a small silver plaque he had set in the ground. She leaned closer to read it. It didn't start with love. It started with life. Her eyes filled again, but this time they weren't tears of pain. They were joy pure and quiet and whole. Ethan wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder as they looked at the two trees swaying gently in the sea breeze. "Think they'll grow tall?" she asked. "Stronger together," he said. The last light of the day flickered across the waves, the horizon glowing gold. One final time before night settled in. Inside the lantern on the porch came to life, casting a soft beam across the sea. Its glow stretched far into the dark, like a heartbeat against the infinite. And for a moment, it felt as if the whole world had paused to breathe with them. Somewhere between the sound of the surf and the whisper of the wind, Ethan murmured, "You gave me a heart. Let me give you forever." She turned, eyes shining, and kissed him. And in that small house by the sea, two lives that had once been strangers became something more, proof that kindness could still rewrite fate, that love born from loss could last a lifetime. And as the ocean sighed and the stars began to rise, the world beyond seemed distant, quiet, healed. If this story touched your soul, leave a comment, share it, and keep believing in the quiet power of kindness. Because sometimes the stories that stay with us aren't the loud ones filled with fame, revenge, or fortune. They're the ones whispered between two hearts, who found each other against all odds. Somewhere tonight, someone is waiting for a miracle they don't yet know is coming. Somewhere a nurse is holding a patient's hand. A stranger is buying a meal for someone cold. A donor is signing a form that could save a life they'll never see. Maybe that's where love truly begins, not in grand gestures, but in small moments of humanity that remind us we are never really alone. If you believe that kindness still has the power to heal a broken world, then let this story live beyond the screen. Share it with someone who needs hope, who's forgotten that goodness still exists, who's been told the world is too cruel to care. Remind them that compassion isn't weakness, it's courage in its purest form. Drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. Tell us if you've ever experienced a kindness that changed you, or if you've been the one to give it without expecting anything in return. Your story matters too. It's part of a chain that links hearts across oceans and generations. Proof that we are connected in ways deeper than we realize. And if you've ever lost faith in love in people, in second chances, let this be your reminder that light still finds its way through cracks, that redemption is real, that giving doesn't empty you, it multiplies. The harbor light may just be a house by the sea in our story, but for someone out there, it's a symbol, a promise, that what you give freely will always return in unexpected ways. So before you scroll away, take one small action. Leave a comment to keep the story alive. Share it so someone else feels less alone tonight. Because kindness, once released, ripples farther than any algorithm can measure. And maybe, just maybe, your act of sharing becomes the start of another story, one where love, courage, and grace still matter. From all of us at Emma's Stories, thank you for being part of this journey. You are proof that stories can heal, that empathy still has an audience, and that even in a noisy world, the quiet power of kindness still echoes the loudest.